What's new in filmmaking technology this week? News, reviews, education, insights, opinions, and ideas from the CineD newsroom with Nino and Johnnie Bahiri. This is Focus Check, the weekly Cinetech podcast.
Welcome everybody to episode 11 of CineD Focus Check podcast. Johnny, how are you?
Nino, how are you?
I'm good.
You've been traveling quite a lot lately, so I'm happy to see you back at the office, and I'm happy to see you. We say in Japanese genki, meaning full of energy and power, especially for this podcast.
Yeah, so I just came back from 2 days in London with Apple for the Apple event. It was the first time that we were invited to an Apple event, which is quite exciting. Guess the reason being so far, you know, like, I mean, they always deal with stuff that's relevant for filmmakers, of course, in some way or another. But in the end, of course, it's a lot of Apple is consumer products. And of course, there's professional products, but it's a part of that. And so we wondered why was there the invitation. And then, of course, I found out. I mean, it's they announced a new iPad Pro with the M4 chip, which was already leaked through rumors before. So that's the first product in their complete lineup that has the new M4 chip, which came as a bit of a surprise. So actually you now have a super powered iPad Pro, but you don't have MacBooks yet with that same processor.
I'll ask you later, why do you think that's exactly the first product to be equipped with a new processor?
Yeah, and then of course, and I think that is probably the main reason why we're invited, something that came as a surprise that was not leaked in any of those leaks beforehand. Final Cut Pro got a big update for iPad. It was introduced like a year ago, completely new application at the time, and now Final Cut Pro 2, you can tell that they're taking this seriously because it was kind of completely redeveloped for touch, which was one of the things that people complained about the first version, that not everything was perfect with touch, but now it seems to be. And they also introduced something entirely new called Final Cut Camera, like a free app for iPhone and iPad.
That sounds familiar in some ways.
But before we talk about the content, I just want to mention the experience of an Apple event a little bit, because it's like, I mean, we've been to a lot of press events in our days, right, for a lot of manufacturers. So sometimes they invite us to different countries for introduction of products. And those are always nice events. Of course, they put them nicely together, and it just to have of course, a nice atmosphere when they introduce new products. Sometimes when it's cameras, they also put us in places where we can try those cameras. And it's always not so easy because there's so many other press people. So it's never ever a real review, right? I mean, you've been to many of those.
But a lot of like first hand. But
exactly.
Of course, you're competing on cameras with other members of the press.
But of course, I mean, being at an Apple event, like that's it's a different level of perfectionism. I mean, you would kind of expect this from Apple, from what we know. But just for people who are watching the video version of this podcast, I can show some footage. So I'm working on a video report still for this, which I'm going to release over the next few days. But basically, this is just some of the raw footage. So it took place in Battersea Power Station. That is this huge building in close next to Battersea Park, actually, where BSC Expo happens.
That looks beautiful.
That's a completely newly made area. Like everything there is, you can tell, new. It's a completely refurbished old power station. Oh, sorry, same shot again. And it's an impressive building, to say the least. And they made this their new UK headquarters. And there's a huge Apple store in there as well, but the
whole thing.
Not the whole thing, not the whole thing. So when you go inside, what you see is actually, of course, a shopping mall. Like everything is commercialized. So this is a huge kind of luxury shopping mall, and there's an Apple store and a lot of other shops. But a huge part of the building is actually owned or, like occupied by Apple, leased, whatever. So they redid this, like I think Foster and Partners were the architects. It's a massive inside. So that's their offices. And it's the first time they ever let any externals into that building. This is kind of new for Apple, I heard, like from all the other journalists and vloggers, YouTubers that I met that have been to many Apple events. Usually it's kind of rare that they let people actually film inside those venues. This was a first. And there were around I would say 200, 250 press and influencers from all over Europe, some from Asia, even Australia, some from Japan. They did simultaneous events, I heard, in New York and Singapore, I think, or which I didn't know about before. And all the Americans went to New York, but especially our Europeans. There were a lot of Germans there, a lot of people from the UK, Ireland, and so on.
So it seems like the main event was actually taking place in Europe.
Yeah, they did this in London. Now, of course, I mean, since COVID, Apple has not done any live keynotes anymore, right? They kind of went into this format of those, the streams that we all know. I mean, this is what you saw online. We saw the same thing at the same time there. And of course, it was kind of like accompanied by, real hands-on and meeting the people. Some of the people who are in the video were there, who actually presented the products and showed us everything. But basically, we're sitting in front of a huge LED screen, LCD screen, and watching the same kind of stuff. But of course, with a lot of hands-on afterwards. So you got this very nice little Apple badge. So I mean, like the level of perfectionism in those events is staggering. I mean, literally, you can you feel like you can freely move around, but they're always
always there.
They're always there
to supervise.
Yeah, but it's in a very nice way. Like it's very well done. Yeah.
You also said that every team member, if you have a question, when you ask a team member, there will always be a nice, polite answer.
Exactly.
It's not like I don't know or sorry, I have to ask.
Exactly. You basically, for example, you walk up to a random person, you're like, where do I need to get to the bus to the hotel? And it's not that they show you where, like, point you to somebody else. It doesn't matter who you ask, they walk you out to the bus, which was like, okay, interesting. And after that, there was a nice little hands-on area there, which was also funny, by the way, because I went there again a bit later for a meeting, and this whole area disappeared. Like, you see these walls in the back, all this stuff, this was gone the next morning.
So it transformed into
this was
something
back
else?
transferred into a cafe. So there was a lot of tables there and chairs, and it looked nothing like this. Those walls were not there anymore. And the whole LCD screen was gone. There were trees there. So it's like overnight, they kind of transformed this back into...
So it's like you went into a place that you visited a few hours before, and you went like, am I at the same place?
Exactly. And I wasn't the only one. I was looking at some of the other YouTubers, and I was like, we were all a bit confused if it was the same place, but it was the same place. But so basically you sit in the audience and you watch this, it's of course a very well done production. I mean, I think a lot of people have seen this. I'm just turning around here, so you see all those people sitting there, typing away on their laptops and like reporting from the scene. Then you of course have some of the people, as I said, from the video there that are presenting stuff. And actually, Will, the guy in the video that talked about the Final Cut stuff, he also gave a little bit of an interview about Final Cut to me afterwards, which I'm going to include in the video as well.
Nice.
So, so very nice. Let's talk a little bit about the products. Now, the iPad itself is, as you said before, before we started recording, the question always is with the iPad, like, is it a professional tool? I mean, it's called iPad Pro, but are there a lot of people already editing on the iPad? I would say yes, maybe not in a filmmaking world, but you can see they're really targeting especially content creators with editing on the iPad. And I think since the iPad Pro was introduced, they've been taking this a lot more seriously. I mean, before Apple went really into this with software, we had LumaFusion, which already was quite popular. And I think they recognized this ability. Then Final Cut came out and DaVinci came out. And both DaVinci and Final Cut for iPad in their first versions were a little bit criticized for, like being not ports. I mean, Final Cut is definitely not a port from Mac, but DaVinci is. And you can tell that some things you simply cannot do with touch, which of course should be the case if you do this on iPad. And I think Apple really took this seriously. You can see that in this, that's why they included it in an event like this, because usually if they do software updates to like niche software, I would say, something that is not relevant for everybody, but for, like only video creators, they might not include this in an event. But you can tell they put a lot of effort into this, and they completely redesigned Final Cut, and it's now really working well for touch. Let me just skip ahead here. So there's a little look at the new Final Cut. It's not out yet. It's coming later this spring. And this is a demonstration. So they have something called I think it's called background removal mask. It's, of course that's perfect for an easy key, like even if you have a background that is not a perfect green screen or anything like that, it just basically, of course you need a contrasty foreground, I'm sure. And I'm sure the demo footage was well selected, but you basically move this filter on top of, so we see here a dancer in front of a background, and they just move this filter on top, and then the background is automatically removed.
But this full-featured editing system, let's call it, or software, is now aimed at whom exactly? Mostly content creator?
I don't know. I think honestly, yes. I mean, the thing is, it can you can edit ProRes RAW with this. It takes, I think, the same codecs as the desktop version. Now, of course, it's somewhat limited. It's not the exact same Final Cut. And I asked this question that you cannot round trip. So you can actually start a project on Final Cut for iPad, and you can move it over to Mac, but then you can't go back anymore, which is understandable because it's not fully featured. You don't have all the filters, you don't have all the titles, you don't have probably all the codecs. But it of course makes sense to, even on professional sets, I would say, to start and edit on set with the iPad, maybe in front of the client, just to try some stuff out, and then move it over to desktop.
If I'm not a Final Cut user, how easy will it be for me to dive into this? Because it looks very nice and very intuitive, especially if you have this kind of drag and drop or touch and drop.
It's very easy to, I think Final Cut in general is very easy to get into. It's just and that's always been the point of criticism since the first Final Cut X came out, over 12 years ago. The way the timeline works is just something you need to get used to. It's this magnetic timeline, which actually always it's kind of a non-destructive way. So when you can't like the normal default tools, if you move something on top of something else, it's not overwriting it, it's moving it out of the way. And that's and it's all sticking together. But once you wrap your head around this and start working with the so-called roles, you can actually, I think it works really well. I use Final Cut for small stuff. Like actually I'm editing this thing on Final Cut. I think it's the fastest turnaround NLE still, and it's underestimated in terms of how far it's come over those 12 years. And now I think they're releasing, actually, in that kind of was like they didn't even talk about it in the keynote, and they also didn't talk about it at the event. But there is going to be a big update for the desktop version of Final Cut as well, which is finally introducing some AI functions. Now, AI in general is a topic that, like everybody's been waiting for Apple to announce some kind of AI stuff in their product in general. Of course, you have Microsoft, you have some of the other magnificent seven, the big companies investing so much into AI functionality, and everybody's kind of waiting for Apple to not only introduce this in their professional software. They call this AI. Of course, it's machine learning. A lot of the things they introduced for iPad Final Cut is machine learning based, and they emphasize that. But people are also waiting for stuff around Siri. Like Siri can really do a lot better, and like this at some point will come. And this event happened at a funny moment in time, because Apple usually so far has never done an event in May. Yeah. And it's weird because it's just a month ahead of WWDC in Cupertino, which is their Worldwide Developers Conference, where over 6,000 of their developers are always invited. And traditionally, they always show the next version of iOS and the next version of macOS, which is then always released in September, October time. So just to give those developers time to develop stuff in the meantime. And everybody's expecting Apple to announce AI-related stuff there. And what's funny, we have those new iPads now, but they haven't shown the new iOS, the iPad OS that's actually coming for them, right? So it felt like they can tell us some stuff of what's included, but they can't really talk about the operating system because that's going to be announced next month. So I expect actually those iPads to be more fully featured once they announce what's really coming in terms of the new iPad OS.
So one of the items in this new iPad Pro is actually the processor. It's the first time that they're using the M4 processor. Why do you think they chose it's part of this AI strategy? Or could you see an immediate benefit using that processor on that specific product?
Yes. I mean, the reason I can show how thin this thing is. And of course, I mean, we're always like, you know, it's really thin. It's considerably thinner than the previous version of the iPad Pro. Now, it's almost like a running gag. Apple always tries to make things slimmer. And there's a question as to how much sense does make as a professional, because, you know, like you need the power. However, I have to say with the previous iPad, and I had an iPad Pro for some time, but I actually decided to return it because it was too heavy. And simply because, of course, that should be a device that you use in the moment, that you kind of like, you know, when you use keyboards, it's always like an abstract way of working with things because you're not directly literally touching what you're working on, whether it's typing. That's why handwriting is actually much better to memorize stuff. And I'm looking forward to trying also the editing on iPad Pro, because I think it's going to be a much more intuitive way of working if it works properly, which I expect it to be in the new Final Cut. But anyway, so that's why I wanted an iPad. But what ended up happening is if you have the previous iPad Pro, the larger version, the 13-inch, I think it was 12.9-inch, now it's 13-inch, you held it in one hand and you tried to do stuff in the other hand. You got tired after a while. Like you literally had to put it down, I felt.
And then it's like a laptop.
And then exactly. And then you put it on top of the keyboard, which is great. Now they also have a new keyboard with like aluminum armrests, which is much more similar to a MacBook now, which is nice, of course. But you don't want to do this all the time. But I kind of felt like I'm losing one of the main benefits when I do that. So I actually went back to the normal iPad that I have, which is maybe not as fully powered, but much lighter. And but the new one is 100 grams lighter, and it doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot. And it's funny, you hold it and you can immediately realize, I mean, I hold it in this video in one hand, and you feel like you can hold this for a very long period of time while actually doing the touch editing, for example, with your other hand. So this will make a big difference. And how is this connected to the M4? Well, actually, they said they could only make it thinner because of the M4. The M4 uses less power, which means it generates less heat, which again means they can make it thinner. And less power also means, of course, smaller batteries possible. So I heard that they always, I got some information, I heard from somebody that they're always trying to target around a 10-hour average usage time. And from my own experience, they are very much on the conservative side here. So they under-promise, to be honest. It's usually really 10 hours, and it's sometimes a little bit more because, you know, a lot of the stuff is not like using a lot of GPU power anyway, so it might need less power. But all of the iPads kind of always hover around the 10-hour mark. And I guess they, you know, put in a smaller battery because it's a less power hungry processor, and that made it possible to make it thinner and lighter, but still having the same processing power.
Is it something that you're looking forward for reviewing? This is something that you have when you see this and you see the new functions.
Now, yes. With the first Final Cut, I was skeptical because, like always, you know, like a first version, honestly, of an Apple product, or any product, to be honest, is always, you know, like they kind of wait for feedback, and then they get the feedback and they really work on that with the next generation. I bought the second generation iPhone when it came out, the iPhone 3G, because I said like, okay, in the first version, let's skip that. And it always, I think it's always a good idea to do that. And the same is true with the Final Cut. I think they took it seriously, and you can tell that, I guess, the majority of that Final Cut team actually worked on the iPad version for this.
Okay, so that's the first, or we talked about that and the Final Cut, which is running on it. How about this new kind of Final Cut camera. What is that exactly?
Yeah, so Apple also announced a new free app for iPhone and iPad called Final Cut Camera, which of course you immediately are like, oh, is this
Sounds
competing
like-
with Blackmagic Camera? Blackmagic Cam, I think it's called. And yes, to a degree it is, because it gives you full manual controls of the iPhone. You can change ISO, you can change shutter speed. You cannot change aperture because the iPhone cameras don't have a changeable aperture, unfortunately. But you can change everything else, basically. You can shoot in log. Unfortunately, for some reason, the first version does not have a preview LUT, which is something we immediately told them, like, we need preview LUTs, because that's the funny thing. A lot of the other journalists I talked to there, like a lot of them are just covering Apple stuff in general. They're not professional filmmakers or video makers by any degree, but they make videos. And one guy from Switzerland actually told me he's been editing videos for his newspaper on iPad, in Final Cut for iPad, since it came out. And that's how he got into editing, which is interesting, right? And he said that, like I told him, like, isn't having a preview LUT kind of essential for you? Because he doesn't want to deal with log, and he just basically slaps on the preview LUT and then even exports it with it, which is fine. Yeah. So, and he said, of course, I mean, it's something that for me, it's funny that it's not included, because it's something especially for content creators and semi-professionals, which should be there. I think that's something they have to put in quite quickly.
But that's the question. Are they aiming to, is that the target audience, somebody who is working in log? Because it can be that it just targeted to people who just shoot.
Well, it shoots
normally
log. I mean, if the app does log, there must be a reason for that.
No, sure. But I'm just saying, of course, this is with, they're also aiming for professionals, I guess, but maybe for the first version, yeah, who knows.
But what's really exciting about the app, what I wanted to say is that it's this live multicam feature. So you can use up to 4, and they demonstrated it for us here. You can use up to 4 iPhones or iPads, or a combination of those, and get a live stream into an iPad. And then you can live cut between those cameras. Now, that is something we have seen, of course, with the Blackmagic Cloud thing. What's different here is the fact that it records those proxies. So basically those streams, that works over Wi-Fi, and it's not connected to your Apple ID, meaning you can use, because that was one of the questions, right? Do all the phones need to be on the same Apple ID? No, you can use, of course, anybody's iPhone who's on the set, and then kind of download the app and just integrate it in this. It live streams from the phone's proxies, yes, and then you can immediately start editing after. You can also start recording from the iPad on all the other phones, right? And then it records not only the proxies inside the iPad and the live stream proxies, but also on each of the phones, and it records ProRes on those phones. And what happens when you press stop, you can immediately start editing the multicam based on the proxies, and as you are doing that, in the background, it's automatically transferring the ProRes over Wi-Fi and automatically replacing them. You won't even notice, which is kind of brilliant, right? You can if you think about a content creator setup, I mean, they demoed a little content creator setup there, because of course that's the most realistic thing. So they had one camera mounted on the ceiling, kind of, and then 3 other ones, 2 at the presenter and 1 other one at the iPad, and that's a quite realistic thing. If you have your little home studio in your living room, whatever, you do your YouTube channel, you have maybe, most people will probably have 2 iOS devices, maybe their phone and their iPad, and you can still have 2 angles.
I think what's interesting, we all kind of started with a single device. Like, you sit in front of the camera as a content creator, you talk to the camera and so on, or even a small interview, 1 camera. But now with this ability to do up to 4 streams or 4 cameras, that's becoming really, really interesting. So this is really like having a mini studio with existing devices that you have, can shoot in a very high quality.
Yeah.
That will be very interesting to put into practice, and also see how we here at CineD can actually maybe find a way to work with that type of setup for some occasions. Very interesting.
Yeah, it's a very intuitive way of working with multicam. You don't need to deal with timecode generators and all that. Of course, it's all built in, right? Because the phones have an atomic clock basically in there, so they don't need the timecode generator, and it all happens automatically in the background. Now, the thing is, they're recording ProRes, and I asked which flavor of ProRes. Can you change the flavor of ProRes? And he said, I think it's ProRes 422 HQ, and that's massive. Yeah, I don't know why.
Why not LT?
Exactly.
For that type of job, it might be perfect.
I completely agree, especially from the phone. Like the phone probably doesn't even give you the type of I mean, it's 10-bit, right? LT is also 10-bit.
Can I be a bit cynical here? Maybe it's always engineers developing a product or a certain workflow versus users.
Yeah. I mean, we noticed that in the demo setup, they already had a project which was quite heavy in data because, of course, they have been demoing it all day. But still, I mean, I think it would make sense to have LT and normal 422. There's no, I mean, it's an iPhone, right? We're not talking about.
For that specific, for like the usage of that setup, I think.
It's more than enough. And we know from our lab test of the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max that the latitude is simply not there. I mean, it has a okay dynamic range because of all the noise reduction, but there's not a huge amount of latitude. It's still a small sensor and still very processed inside the phone, and you cannot turn off the processing, right? I mean, it's still the noise reduction, I mean.
One question that I have, what is the logic actually of competing Blackmagic design here? Because on one hand, those companies are working together, developing a product for Apple in a way. I mean, of course, it's a Blackmagic app, but they worked closely with Apple, and now suddenly Apple is coming with their own version. Do you think it's going to cannibalize some of the Blackmagic stuff?
I think it will come down to what editing software you use, because of course the Blackmagic thing is Blackmagic camera is heavily integrated with DaVinci, and this is heavily integrated with Final Cut, and Apple still promotes DaVinci. I mean, they showed us when we saw a demo of the power of the iPad Pro, they demoed it with DaVinci Resolve. And they actually showed I saw a very impressive demo of color grading, and then also another app that could do like 3D animation, and those were working in parallel. I mean, the amount of power of this thing is crazy, to a degree where you wonder, are there enough apps out there? Because that's always been the problem, right? Are there actually, apart from gaming, but even games is limited so far. I mean, it does real-time ray tracing and all those crazy things where, like, it's impressive, but will there be enough apps to actually support all this power? And isn't probably the normal iPad Air, which was also got a spec bump and is now an M2. So basically the new iPad Air has most of the specs from the previous iPad Pro, and also now a version with a bigger screen.
And it's even thinner, no?
No, it's not thinner. The iPad Air is the same. It also has the same camera system and everything. It has it doesn't have the what is called True Motion something. It doesn't have the same screen as the iPad. So the iPad screen on the previous model was still better. And the new iPads, of course, have OLED. That's, by the way, also very impressive, because the level to what these screens have gotten is staggering. The problem with OLED screens, and I think that was one of the reasons why they haven't introduced an OLED so far, you can never have an OLED that is as bright as a normal LCD, right? Because of the individual pixels being illuminated, they can simply not be as bright as a backlit LCD, technically, which means like any OLED screen that gets bigger gets also darker. Like the average brightness of a TV OLED, like one I have at home, 4K OLED, is only 250 nits.
Really?
Yeah, it can't go. It's very hard to make those brighter. And Apple found a solution to this. So they introduced a new technology called Tandem OLED. So basically what they did, they put two OLEDs on top of each other, and they told us spend a lot of time on actually, like making sure that those work really in tandem. So they can't be like out of sync, because you would have, like motion blur and other artifacts, and of course, and it looks amazing. I mean, that's something we cannot really transcend in our videos because you will have to see it yourself. But it's the new iPad Pro is literally the closest that they came to this idea of having this magic sheet of glass that they always wanted to have, which is just, like a screen, which is showing you perfect quality. And it is. I mean, they showed some very high resolution photos with extreme contrast, and black is now black and bright is now bright. And it looks better than any professional production monitor that I've seen. And that's amazing, because that means you can use this. I can see this show up in post-production workflows on sets, because you can literally, that's the best way to look at footage that I've seen so far from any of those devices. Of course, the iPhone is fine as well, because it also has an OLED now and so on, but it's small. And this is, it's massive, and it's bright. I think up to 500 nits.
When is this Final Cut
or actually
camera?
1,000 nit peak, sorry. Yeah.
When is this Final Cut camera app will be available for downloading and trying?
They say later this spring. So they probably later this spring. I mean, spring is not that long anymore, so it's probably in June, maybe late May or early June. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. The same for the new version of Final Cut for iPad.
And the iPad itself, the iPad Pro with the M4 chip. When is this going to be available?
And it's shipping next week.
Next week.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, they have, of course, a lot of other updates. They have this new Apple Pencil Pro, not so relevant for filmmakers. However, there is a function in Final Cut where you can actually, let me see if I have a little bit of footage there. Yes. You can use the pencil in Final Cut. So this is like a live drawing in Final Cut. And we see that you can literally draw on a shot, and like they put a little bit of text there in the background, and you can animate that, and that's it's quite nice. I've not seen any other type of NLE being able to do that. So you can work with a pencil there. The thing is, the pencil is much more refined. I mean, I still have the first version of the pencil for an older iPad, and it's very limited, of course, but now it actually can understand direction. So, for example, you can do like calligraphy. It will preview you what the actual thing will look like the shape of the pencil that you're using. I can't find it here. But so basically, you can do calligraphy. You can also, it's pressure sensitive now. It has a squeeze function. So when you squeeze it, it shows you the tools that are available. Like here is like a little tool set shows up, and then you can select there's a lot of things, and I think especially for people who are drawing and doing graphic design with iPad, it's come a long way, And I also saw some integrations of upcoming apps from third-party app makers that like 3D animation apps like SketchUp. That's something that allows you to kind of do a 3D rendering of a room. So basically you use your iPad and scan the entire room, and you get like a literal, first of all, it does all the surfaces and everything, and recognizes all the objects. And then also you get a little bit of a map of that room, and you can redesign the room, and it's crazy. And then there's the 3D animation apps, and in the 3D animation apps you can modify those 3D models with the pen, which is a much more intuitive way than doing this, of course, with a keyboard. So there's a lot of, I think for a lot of other creative industries, this pen will be quite relevant. Let's see how, actually I can see this. I hope that Blackmagic Design embraces this as well in the next version of DaVinci for iPad, because especially with a node-based workflow, I can see it would make a lot of sense for them to embrace those different tools that you have with the pencil. Because sometimes, of course, with touch, when you use your finger, you're a little bit slower than with the keyboard because you don't have the shortcuts. But essentially with the pen, you could do a lot of those functions through tools, and it's just a different way of interacting with the content.
I guess if you are like me, more into traditional way of editing, that will be interesting to explore and see how all of those new tools, like new style tools, if they can work on every day or only certain project. Just interesting.
Well, I think it's funny in a way if you think about it. I mean, we've been working, the shape of a laptop or a desktop hasn't changed really in the last, 20, 30 years. I mean, we essentially always got more powerful computers, but we still use the same keyboard essentially. And it's in a way weird that you have all this power now, but you still, we're creatures of habit or habit creatures. Like you learn this and it's very hard to change the way people interact with stuff. And I think Apple is very good at that. I mean, they all taught us how to use touchscreens with the iPhone, right? And it's just that into the professional realm, this has not really transcended fully, right? We still, the fastest way to interact is still keyboard shortcuts, which is fair enough. But it's not a very intuitive way. It's very abstract and there's a lot to learn. Whereas I think if somebody finally makes the software properly work to do all the functions we need with touch and pen, whatever, it will make a difference. And it can create. You can come up with different kind of content because it's a different way of interacting. It's more fun to edit like this. I can already tell you that. I think I'll enjoy it more to actually sift through footage doing it like this, and let's see. I mean, let's see how much people will embrace that. And for sure, I mean, in terms of, I think it's maybe a niche that we kind of neglect, but this whole content creation niche is a much bigger field than professional filmmaking.
Of course.
So, whether we like it or not, but I think a lot of people will embrace this live multicam stuff. We will see this area. The only thing that I really hope they will do at some point, imagine having this functionality on cameras. Just this live multicam integration. Imagine you can use your iPhone to connect it to your camera. Maybe using a third-party thing like the new Atomos phone or an Axon Simo, and then kind of get the footage from your camera into that app and then have the live multicam, because then you could do live streaming with direct ability to edit this by the ProRes that are transferred over Wi-Fi, but using proper cameras and not being forced to use the iPhone or iPad. So that's something I hope, and I'm sure that those companies will already be thinking about. I don't know if there's an API from Apple to allow that, but
I can already see the frustration of transferring so much data over Wi-Fi from 3-4 cameras.
Yeah.
So I hope that the proxy is good enough also for some applications when you need to be very fast with outcome. But anyway, good. That sounds really promising. It sounds very interesting. You came up with a lot of energy. So obviously you saw, it sounds like a nice event, but also very useful in the sense of the upcoming software and hardware.
And you can tell that it takes, the filmmaking thing seriously just by the fact that we've been invited and some other people who report about camera stuff have been invited, which I don't think has been the case very often in the past. So, they are, of course, a Goliath in terms of what they do, and our niche is just small in comparison. But it's nice to see that there is an effort to integrate more with the professional workflows as well.
Good. What else? So what else happened this week since we talked last time?
Well, we released the Burano 8K lab test, which is something that a lot of people have been waiting for a very long time. So, yeah, that Gunther made that lab test, but what can you tell me about it?
Well, the Burano, I think we were exposed to the Burano already in Japan when it was before the release, actually. And even then, it looks like a very interesting camera. It looks like Sony is trying to bring a lot of quality, or let's call it a Venice 2 quality, in a very compact form factor, and also in a reduced price. So, of course, the question was, is it good as the Venice 2, or where are the limitations? Couple this with some advantages that this camera has, like an internal stabilization system, for example. So you might get kind of a perfect independent, like a tool for independent filmmakers. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons that people really, really want to know more about the camera. And as always, when we deal with numbers, there's always a little gap or big gap, depends how you do this, between the actual numbers to how the footage looks like. And the camera came out, it's being slowly shipped, and more people are using it. And actually, it was interesting to see that what we found out in our lab test is kind of correlating to the results in the field. And just a short reminder, what we do in our lab test, we test three essential things. One is the dynamic range of the camera. The second thing is the rolling shutter effect. And the third one is the latitude test. And the latitude test is one of the most important tests among the three, because it also shows things that maybe when we check the dynamic range, we don't see firsthand. For example, the amount of noise reduction that the camera is actually, the manufacturer is actually using or putting in order to make the dynamic range a little bit better. So what we can see here with the results, few significant findings. First of all, in some ways, the Burano is better when it comes to the latitude test than the Venice 2. And that's actually very interesting. I personally did not expect the lower priced camera to be better than the flagship camera of Sony. But on the other hand, when it comes to the rolling shutter, you can see that the camera is kind of heavily suffering from a very high rolling shutter effect. And this is something that, of course, many are asking in this price range of $25,000. Why do we have such a high number? Why the rolling shutter effect is so severe? Yeah, and we will touch in a second about answers. And the last thing is the dynamic range. And again, Gunther really went into details here. He checked a few resolutions. That's also very important, because each resolution might have a different rolling shutter effect and dynamic range, and even the latitude might be a bit different. I think Gunther came to the conclusion, kind of also the codec, by the way, because if it's the XOCN, LT, or a more compressed codec. And in his conclusion, he likes the camera quite a lot. And we also, this is for complete transparency, before we publish such a review, such a lab test, we always send a preview of this article to the manufacturer, in this case for Sony, just to see if technically they think that we made something wrong in terms of our results. I think it's fair enough, because we also got the camera from Sony originally. Yeah. So we also asked about different stuff, including the rolling shutter effect. Why is it so high? And it's not that we got, or let's say differently, it's not that we expected to get any clear answer why is this happening. But on the other hand, our results are similar to what Sony probably achieved, because we did not get any technical feedback, meaning it is what it is. And now it's really up to the end user to decide if they like it. We know from users that they are a bit disappointed with the rolling shutter. On the other hand, we know that there are people who really love the picture quality. And this is, again, the big difference between numbers and reality, like how at the end the footage looks like.
I think, and it's also important to emphasize that our lab tests are really only looking at those three things, because some people are always like, if one of the results is not what they expected, are like, oh, this is garbage, I'm never going to use it. It's like, this is just looking at those things, and there's never a full picture of a camera, not by a long shot. It's literally only looking at the sensor quality. This camera, I think, has a lot of things going for it. Like you said, the fact that it has in-body stabilization in combination with an electronic variable ND. And the variable ND in the Sony is the best that's out there in professional cameras. Nobody has something comparable, actually. That's really impressive. And just for them being able to combine the sensor stabilization with that is a first in the industry, and it's a very nice small package. And when I used it on the Sony event in London the first time when I introduced it last year, and then later again here, I always feel like it's a very nice camera to just shoot and pick up and shoot without having to think a lot. And they learned a lot when it comes to menu design and all that kind of stuff. And of course the having the ability to shoot RAW internally is something that a lot of people who are picking up a Burano now are not used to, because very often they come from FX6, FX9 and upgrade. And this latitude that you get with the ability to work on a RAW codec is amazing. Yeah. But of course, I mean, the rolling shutter is a bit of a disappointment, and I just hope that the sensor, the in-body sensor stabilization will compensate for some of that, of course, because having the ability to have a stabilized sensor will, of course, counteract that rolling shutter a little bit.
But still, I personally would have hoped that that result is a bit better, because at the end of the day,
it's expensive.
It's an expensive camera, and you expect it to perform well. Yeah, so you need to know that will limit you with some assignments. And I don't want even to think what will happen if you put a tele lens, shoot some wildlife documentary, and every movement might be really affected, for example, or some fast sport actions. But again, we know there are tools for different tools for different missions, and we actually would love to hear from you guys if you already have the camera, or if you were thinking about buying the camera, if such a high number or in a way such disappointing rolling shutter effect, if that will be the thing to prevent you from buying the camera.
Yeah, I think other than that, I mean, if that wasn't the case, I think also a lot of people who are Venice 2 users, I mean, Sony doesn't really see it like that, I guess, but I think a lot of people who use Venice 2 now on higher end sets will probably look at the Burano. Simply because, of course, it's a lighter version of that RAW codec, but we've seen this story before. I think it's enough for a lot of people. It's like, it almost reminds me to the original Alexa, what was it, XT or whatever, and then the Mini came out, and then they thought the Mini is like a B camera, but then it really became the A camera for a lot of productions, simply because it's smaller and lighter, and that might be the case for a lot of productions with this camera as well. So
just in general, just to summarize this is a 8.6K camera, but it might be that, not might be, sometimes the results in full frame crop 6K are better. Just that you take that people will take this into account.
Well, the whole story about, I mean, I'm an FX9 user, and I'm not a big fan of how Sony calls those full frame crop, because that's like an oxymoron, right? It's like black milk. It's is it full frame or not? They call it full frame crop, and when it's cropped into the full frame, it's not full frame anymore. That's the truth. And so the real full frame is 8.6K, and then they have a mode called full frame crop, which gives better results for rolling shutter and so on, and also some of the image results are better. But people also have to ask themselves, who really needs to shoot in 8.6K? Do you really need that kind of resolution? But well, you do lose some field of view if you crop down.
Yeah.
Okay. The one thing to add, people might know our camera databases, which are holding all the results from the lab tests of all the cameras we've tested. Like, once you go into the camera databases, you will have an overview of all the cameras that have a lab test with a little mark here on the side, which says lab in green. And once you click on one of those results, you will get an overview of the dynamic range results from IMA test with a ranking, as well as the rolling shutter result. Now, one thing that we will add shortly are the latitude, exposure latitude results, because that's a request that we got from a lot of people. It's already designed, it's going to be in development, and we will add this so you can also compare the latitude results, which in a way, as we said, are a lot more telling than the dynamic range results, because over the last few years, a lot more cameras have become a lot smarter in adding noise reduction that kind of tricks the IMA test results into seeming as if the dynamic range was better than it is. For example, the iPhone test that we did actually resulted in a great dynamic range result, but it's irrelevant in a way because there was so much noise reduction applied, which is why we decided not to include that result in those rankings, because it would be unfair to the cinema cameras. Let's move on. There's something that we released this week, which was something you worked on a while ago for a long time, and that's a factory tour of our dear lens manufacturer, SIRUI.
Yeah, we have a lot of dear lens manufacturers, just to for the sake of equality. But I was in China earlier this year, and I had the chance to visit SIRUI. This is one of the leading Chinese lens manufacturers, and I think it's my first ever visit to an optical facility in China. And I have to tell you, I was really overwhelmed with what I saw for different reasons. And I actually recommend not only you guys to watch the video, because it's like a travel log thing. And then of course it's fascinating to see how lenses are being made. That's in general. But I also advise, if any of the Japanese lens manufacturers are watching this or listening to us, please take a look at this factory tour, because I think what you can see in a very clear way, and this is regardless if you like SIRUI lenses or if you like lenses from China, from other manufacturers, this cannot be ignored anymore. Chinese manufacturers, when it comes to lenses, they are advancing in a very fast way, and you can tell. I saw that the facility is amazing. Actually, there's one building is more the offices. Another big building is the factory itself, few floors, and then they are now building a second building, which is partly working already, but that will be full of equipment in a very short time. And they are already employing over 700 people.
Wow.
So, and one of the things that really struck me personally is the quality control. I mean, I did not expect to see on every little stage, the ladies and the gentlemen are cleaning the lenses like crazy. Yeah. So it's one thing, the optical quality that will get even better over time, simply because they have engineers, they have optical designers, and they will do even much better in the future. But also the actual workflow, or how they treat the from the raw material all the way to a finished product. And in this line, what I visited, or what I saw mostly, is the Sniper, and which is the first autofocus family of lenses from SIRUI, and also the Saturn lenses, which personally I really like those. They are very lightweight and they are very, very small. And those are anamorphic lenses. And one of the reasons that you can achieve that size and weight is because SIRUI also have what we call aspherical lenses inside the housing of those Saturn lenses. And aspherical, actually, the whole process, first you need a very, very expensive machine to make those lenses, and you have another very expensive machine to measure, to see that actually what you did or what you manufactured is correct. And with aspherical lenses, you can actually reduce the weight and the size of lenses. That's the only way to do so. So many, or let's say many Japanese companies are actually using that method. That's why we see smaller lenses in general. But it's good to see that also a Chinese manufacturer is using this type of method. And I also had the chance to talk to the owner, president, CEO of the company, Mr. Lee. And that was also quite interesting to see his view in general. I mean, if I have to summarize it all, there are two main things. One, there are billions of people out there and they need lenses. It sounds logical. People need the lenses, let's produce lenses. And the second thing is, he really generally, he wants people to to enjoy filming, and that's where he see his role, or the role of the company, next to the financial stuff, of course. But I'm talking about having a lens and enjoy filming with a SIRUI lens. So that's I think that's my summary. And of course, the like traveling to the factory was also a bit interesting in China. I mean, now I know when you enter a train station, it's not like in the West when you just go into a train station, one of the main train stations. You literally have to purchase the ticket beforehand. You have to come with a passport. You have to be admitted at the entrance. You have to go through a security check and a passport check. And only then you can enter the station itself. There is not so much English around. In general, that can be a bit
challenging.
It's a bit challenging, especially if you have to catch a certain train. But at least the staff that I managed to talk to, they really tried their best to help. And yeah, I was in the right train. I was picked up by Sony, who is a key member of the SIRUI team. He's also working for marketing and product development. And he was the person who mainly escorted me during this tour. Guys, it's just nice. It's nice to see how they make lenses. I think it's a nice travel log. And if you are a manufacturer, if you're interested to do a factory tour with us, just write us. Yeah, we are doing a lot of those. We are very happy to expose companies. And if you are a user like us, watch the video. It's nice.
Yeah, and it's nice to thank you for making this one. It's very nice, and I think it's just, like a lot of people, when they hear especially about Chinese or even Japanese lenses, they think like they're made in a factory with no humans there. You know what I mean? It's like it's this weird perception that we have, just because the scale of things there is so much bigger because they have so many people working on stuff. It doesn't mean that there are not humans behind it, and it's nice to hear that they actually, work in the same way as any other lens manufacturers, probably at a bigger scale in a way.
Yeah. And another thing, because I actually recently I did 3 factory tours in China, in Tilta, in Nanguang. This is the mother company that makes non-lux and non-light lights, and SIRUI. And I know that many of us in the West are kind of concerned about the working conditions of people. This is something we can openly talk about it. In none of those companies I saw anything that will kind of alert me, in all honesty. At SIRUI, they even have something that I never saw before with any Western company. Right after lunch, you have 1 hour that you're going to sleep. People are literally opening portable beds, lights are off, everybody's going to sleep, and after 1 hour and a little bit, they wake up fresh, good as new, and they continue to work. So different countries, different mentalities, different habits, it's all very, very interesting. And if, the same with the tea ceremony, I think in every company that I visited, you are welcomed with almost like a private tea ceremony. This is a really part of the Chinese tradition, and it's nice to see how it's being executed.
Well, I think China in general has just come such a long way in such a short amount of time, and you can tell, I think they are also those companies. The good companies are competing with each other for the good people, of course. So they also need to offer some stuff. So I mean, I just hope workers' rights will get where they are in the West at some point, but it's good to see that things are moving.
Yeah. I can only talk about the companies that we have visited.
Of course, yeah.
I don't. Maybe there are other things. I didn't witness anything that I can talk about. Those companies that I visited are treating their workers in a nice way. Almost, I would dare to say, in a family way. I mean, I've seen things that people looked very relaxed, very dedicated. And it's funny to see some of the comments, because some of the young ladies working in the factory, they by the way, some people asked, how can it be that the workers in the factory are making or touching the lenses without gloves? Well, if you look closely, you will see that they have finger gloves. So it's not that they're working with no gloves. They're very clear about this. But it's also nice to see the personalities, because you can still see the little Hello Kitty or different little tattoos, or the finger or the nails being painted in. It's nice because it adds some humanity to the whole working process. Yeah, and it's just nice to see.
Nice. Let's stay on the topic of lenses. We last week launched a new course on MZed.
Congratulations to us.
Congratulations to us. Congratulations to Tal Lazar, who is the course creator. He's a professional filmmaker, but also very good educator who taught a lot on the AFI and many other institutions. And he's based in New York. And he made a new course, which is between 5 and 6 hours long. And it's called The Art and Science of Lenses. Now, he really goes into detail with all those things that we just talked about, and really dives into the technical aspects, but also the foundational aspects of lenses. And the course is unique in a way that it's really scientific in a way, but it's explaining it in an easy way of how light actually moves through a lens. And it helps you as a cinematographer when you hear these things.
Of course.
It's like how light actually goes in and how it goes through to the sensor, and how it's diffused, how it's spreading, and all those things. It's something that we can really recommend to check out. I mean, he really goes into the detail of electrons and all those things, and the visible spectrum, and what we don't see, and the infrared spectrum, ultraviolet spectrum. So we can really recommend this course. It's now on MZed. You can either buy this individually for $50. I think it's a very fair price for almost 6-hour course, or you can watch it for free as part of a subscription to MZed Pro, where you can see 55, 56 other courses in total. So yeah, that's new on MZed.
Yeah, I'm actually very proud that lately we are producing more and more, or sharing more information about lenses and rehousing lenses and so on. This is almost becoming a trend of rehousing, and
I think it's a sign of the times, where we talked about this before, where all cameras are basically perfect now, right? So we don't have cameras anymore, like in terms of like the sensor, the sharpness and all that is great. There are, of course, a lot of differences between cameras, but essentially there's no bad camera out there anymore, new cameras. So what people try to do is to modify the image that's created with those sensors, which means there's more emphasis on certain looks that come from lenses, whether it's anamorphic, whether it's a vintage look, whether it's something that we see from the high to the low end. And we have all those new lens manufacturers like SIRUI and many others that are actually creating lenses that, probably are a bit outside of the norm in a way. So they're going sometimes away intentionally from this perfect clean look to do something which either looks vintage or has a certain anamorphic look. And I think it's nice. I think it's just, it's kind of making our creative choices bigger, and it's also making the cinematic image more unique in a way. Because essentially, like with a phone, you can now create the perfect sharp image, but if you want to create some look, you really need to dive into lenses.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, all you need is a camera and a lens. And all the rest is just luxury.
The brain.
And I'm talking technically speaking. Yeah.
And some eyes. Good eyes. You need good eyes.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's a good way to wrap it up. Thanks for this.
Nino, thank you very much. And guys, thank you very much for being with us. Any comments?
Yeah.
Just write us.
To podcast@cined.com. And we are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, of course, YouTube and all the other podcasting services. Please don't forget to give us a rating on those services. It will really help with, increasing the reach of this podcast. We've only been doing this for less than 3 months, but it's fun. And we want to keep doing it for as long as we can. So please like and subscribe and give us ratings on those platforms. We would really appreciate it. Thank you, and see you next week.
Thank you.